Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and we're back for another episode of the Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Upgrade Journeys podcast series. And I am joined once again by Peter Jekyll of Turn On Dynamics. Hey, Peter, welcome back.
Welcome back to you, sir.
Thank you. And this episode, as our listeners are going to hear, is really an interesting one, and I really thank you for helping put it together. We have a Dynamics AX customer who's in the midst of a project, his primary service provider joining us, and you, who I guess you kind of call your role project sponsor, perhaps, on this project or somewhere along those lines.
Yes, sir.
All right. And so just so our listeners understand, we're going to have two guests. We have Arun. He is the customer's project manager in a way. I mean, he wears a few different hats, and we'll get into exactly what his role is. But he's very deeply in this project, in addition to sort of owning the existing AX system. And then we have Ibrahim, who's sort of leading the services team, right?
Yeah, he's a project manager on the services team, correct?
And go ahead.
And Arun is the project manager on the customer side. But he's also, heads the AX department internally. So he wears many hats and has tremendous responsibilities. So the project management piece on this, project is on top of his day job.
Yeah, and they really have a lot to say about different topics, which really makes it for a fun conversation. We'll talk everything from Azure and sort of the competencies of Azure to tools and techniques, and to how to sort of run a call, right? How to run sort of a daily status call in a positive way.
Yeah,
it doesn't make people want to pull their hair out.
Yeah, and I think the critical thing about this conversation with these two young men is that we're in the midst of a very intense project that has a very specific drop dead date that's internally dictated, for the customer. And so we're facing live fire every morning now as far as, this project goes. And so getting their take, not as an academic exercise on how to best project manage, one of these activities, or looking at it nostalgically, after being done with it. We're in the midst of it here. We're on the daily calls and the daily changes and the, daily, things that hit you coming from all sides. So I think it's an interesting call from that standpoint that, it is, right in the middle of a major project.
All right, well, let's get into it. All right, so we are back. I'm joined once again by Peter Jekyll from Turn On Dynamics, and we have two excellent guests today, two people who are leading or part of the leadership of a really interesting Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations project. They are Arun and Ibrahim. Arun and Ibrahim, welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for inviting us. Arun, could you maybe give a little bit more background on, from your perspective, how this project is sort of unfolding? Maybe just some of the basics of the goals you're working toward right now.
Oh, sure. The project is going really well, I would say. At this point of time, we did have a few hiccups, but like any other project, we are moving forward and we are dealing with those hiccups, and we are moving forward. So, in one of the I would say the hiccup is, we are not only upgrading our AX 2012 R3 to Dynamics 365. At the same time, we are also bringing in a couple of new countries live into Dynamics 365. So that's where our hiccup is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one lesson it did teach me is don't mix projects. So that's a separate project on itself, bringing a new company into the system and keep the upgrade as is. So.
Yeah, Jason, if I could add a couple of things for Arun there, that is a real interesting take on it. I never thought about it from a standpoint of it, adding his new countries as being a specific separate project, but that really is the great take on it. calling Arun the project manager on this is a little bit, misleading because he actually has a big daytime job, which is, being in charge of the AX, infrastructure at his company. So he's the lead guy there. So he has a lot of functional, technical, requirements that he has to meet on a daily basis, as well as doing the project management on this. So he's a pretty busy guy, and this is the project management piece of it is, like I said, on top of a pretty full plate of his his day job.
And does that also mean that on the back end of the project, coming out of the project, Arun, you'll also be sort of owning the finance and operations upgraded system?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and the other kind of wrinkle in here is that there is a drop dead date on this. So there is an internal date, go live date that has some internal regulatory requirements for us to very specifically meet a go live date. And so what that's introduced on this project very critically is the requirement for us to know at any one time what is that critical path for us to make that go live date. And so when you take a look at that, and as Arun mentioned, we're almost running 2 projects, and as these different requirements come in from that new project, and as typically you have things that you did not consider at the beginning, of any type of project of this magnitude, as those come in, we have to recognize, is this a parallel task where we can assign new resources and still be able to do it in the amount of time that we have allotted to us? Or is this something that cuts into our critical path to the go live? And so what we have here is we've got a pretty intense daily effort to make sure that resources and time and requirements and expectations are met. So these guys are juggling a lot of stuff, and it's pretty challenging project. They're in the middle of it, and just wanted to add that to the conversation that they are doing yeoman's work on this.
Peter, I've heard you mention critical path in sort of as we're leading up to having this conversation, and you've brought it up here. Maybe this would be a good chance to bring in Ibrahim. So I hear critical path. I understand it. It's one of those project management concepts that's pretty fundamental. Ibrahim, in your view, is critical path on this project being treated differently or being handled differently than maybe on other projects?
It's basically more or less same, but even though it looked like just an upgrade, not full implementation, but still we have to run multiple critical paths because multiple activities are going on. We talk about 2 separate projects running simultaneously. So it has multiple things are going on. And secondly, a lot of time when we think about cloud and we think about that now infrastructure, it used to have its own 6 to 9 month, implementation. Now it is very short, basically, duration required to implement it. But still all other activities are shrinked in those duration. So technically, now infrastructure, it used to be on critical path, and infrastructure is on the critical path, after being on cloud. The only difference is now the overall duration is shrink to implement a project, but, critical path wise, we are the same.
Getting back to that idea of having 2 critical paths, was that something that you expected when you began this project, or maybe that you have adapted to once you got an understanding of how big that requirement of the extra countries was?
From cloud's perspective, I was thinking that infrastructure won't be a issue or on critical path, and it will be done quickly. But infrastructure is not only hardware provisioning. When it talks about the data, configuring it, all those things, when you combine it, basically it has a similar impact. And I was thinking that it will be much less than what basically we looked into this project or any previous cloud projects.
And I would go with Ibrahim on that, because we did spend a little bit of time on the, when I say infrastructure, is all the cloud hosted servers, and what you can do in the cloud hosted servers and what you cannot do in. So it has been a learning experience for us, both on our side and as well as the consultants who was helping us. So and also one of the key things I would say is we are very early adopters of D365, even though it's been out in the market for a couple of years now. But then, we are one of the very early adopters and who was like actually upgrading to D365. So, and with the entire D365 finance and operations evolving every day, there are more challenges which we are facing, where, like, okay, this was available, a feature was available like a month ago, and that feature is not available now. So that is something which we are still trying to digest, and so all these aspects are adding time to the actual project.
In terms of Arun, that's really interesting. In terms of maybe your responsibilities or other people within your organization when it comes to this idea of having new, I guess, infrastructure versus cloud infrastructure challenges or expertise, have you or have other people on your team had to sort of retrain or get trained on these new concepts or new approaches?
Oh, absolutely. We are an AWS company. So this is the first time we are venturing into the entire Azure platform. So there is nobody in the company who had Azure experience. So in fact, we spent at least like a week trying to figure things out, and all the little basic things, and so that is definitely a challenge. And like even when we are setting up different environments, development test environments, and so how do we push data up to the cloud, and how do we get the data into our the cloud machines? So those are all like, it is a totally a new learning experience, and like I'm learning every day. I'm learning every day on this new cloud platform, and I've not been learning like this in the last 10 years. So,
I would like to add from planning perspective, one of the thing when you go into the new technology, it happened now like in big data and BI, we have seen it, that when you do planning from risk documentation perspective, you don't have, for new technology, known unknowns, which you learn from the experience or lesson learned from the previous project. So when you are planning any risk, you don't have it. That's why you don't have enough mitigation in your plan, and you're not keeping enough contingency from your budget and timing perspective. So that's the fallback of any new technology when we, take over to implement.
and add to that as well is, here the goalpost with respect to Microsoft, it keeps changing. The reason is they are constantly developing, and unlike our the previous AX 2012, they are constantly updating their software. So so the features and the new bug fixes and whatever they release, it might break something on our side. So we are constantly playing the game of catch up, and we don't know what is going to break next. So that's how, because Microsoft is evolving, the D365 is evolving. I think this will go on for another 4 years at least before the software is in a much more steady state, and we don't have Microsoft releases every 6 months or every 2 months. So and this constantly adds time to our what work we are doing to upgrade this project to the latest and the greatest. And you really cannot have a set contingency as well, like how Ibrahim said, like there's, even if you plan for contingencies, that contingency won't be enough.
Jason, let me add on to this perfect conversation that these guys have outlined here. Here's something that blew my mind from talking to consultants that had done these projects before. One of the things that differentiates this upgrade project, that I'm speaking generically, the AX D365 as it stands today, is if you did an AX upgrade, right? The consultants and the between the partner and the company, they had so much control over the environment, the data, right? The databases, all these things that they knew how long things took to do, right? Now, what you have is if you have to spin up an environment or you have to have access to data or you need to do a backup, all things that you take for granted, right? And what Microsoft does is they give you guidance that says, if you want this, it's going to take you this long. And so if you put your plan together, and anybody that's putting a project plan together today to do this kind of stuff, and takes those published times to do a backup, to publish an environment, et cetera, there is a chance that, yes, they'll meet that time frame. There's also a chance that it'll be 5 to 10 times as long as you thought. So that introduces a risk element that you would never think of, right? And everybody, that thinks about the cloud, they think about this, oh, we're just going to go in here and we're going to flip a switch and all of a sudden we have this additional environment or this happens. The actual truth is that the actual tool set that you use, that lifecycle services, that management tool where you go in, we try not even to teach our customers that tool in an upgrade process or an implementation because of the complexity of using it once, that you save a lot of time and effort by doing it yourself. So there are a lot of things that look and sound good from a marketing standpoint, and oh my gosh, it's the cloud, it'll be easy, that in reality from a day-to-day, operational standpoint and a planning standpoint are much, much more challenging.
And it sounds like certain estimates. So have there been cases where you made an estimate like that, and then it just got blown out of the water at some point early on when you looked at the reality versus the the official guidance? Have there been cases like that?
I don't think we've gotten bitten so much by those on this current project. Those are just things that I've seen on other projects. Mm-hmm. And so we're in good shape, I believe. But Arun can tell me otherwise because he manages the environments much more so than I do. But I know it is 100%, an issue that people have raised.
Well, and Arun, you talked to the idea of trying to I guess struggling to assign sort of contingency time, and the maybe it sounds almost like it's futile.
Yes, because the issue is, because if everything is set in the cloud, there is no longer any Microsoft updates or anything like that, then we can have a set time and say, oh, okay, this is going to work, so we can have a proper contingency time. Mm-hmm. But then with the fact that Microsoft, the D365 environment is evolving. Mm-hmm. When it's evolving, you really cannot have a set contingency hours and say that, okay, we are going to use this only when it's necessary, but then you are going to use it and you are going to go over it because your goalpost keeps changing. Things are changing on the Microsoft side every day, and every little thing, which you think that everything is working fine, but then the next day you come in, it won't work. So because some Microsoft update came in, and we don't have the control to stop it. So Microsoft comes in, they update it, they move on. But then when you bring up your system and say, oh, this particular feature is not working. They recently screwed up your reporting, the reports won't run. And we figured out it is a little issue where Microsoft acknowledged that, okay, if we have the Visual Studio up and running and run the reports, it won't work. It's a bug, apparently. So, but I'm just giving you an example. So, not sorry for going in detail, but these are the things which drag you down. So,
sounds like the the kind of issues that have been dragging down enterprise software projects forever. The possibility, especially with newer software and maybe some unique elements, because like you said, it's constantly evolving in the cloud. It's less of a static known system.
agreed.
Well,
And
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, the thing is, like, since we are the earlier adopters of this software, so right now that's how I feel. Maybe like 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, the future customers, they might have much more stable, environments, and and we can have a better understanding and better estimation efforts and things like that.
Can I ask a question about what kind of project this is in terms of, I mean, I get the sense you have a set of very specific, it's an upgrade, so you have a very specific set of capabilities you need to have in place to turn this new system on, right? You can't be like, it's not, so it's more like, to my mind, it sounds more like a waterfall style project with a critical path, some of these traditional elements that that are probably pretty familiar to all of you from past projects. Is that right? Or are there elements of this that are going to be iterative or allow you to be more agile going forward? I'm not sure who to direct this one to.
So
yeah.
This project was a project plan, and everything was done using the sure step methodology. So since it's an upgrade project, the goal for us is take what we have in the existing system, upgrade it, and it works in the new system. Mm-hmm. So we are not trying to look at any new features unless until, like, if the feature which is there in 2012 is deprecated in D365. That's the only time we are looking at a new feature. So basically, like, we are just saying take this and make it work the same way how it is in AX 2012. So once we do the upgrade, then we go back in and we're going to look at, okay, what are the new features and how is that how that can help our business, and and all those good stuff.
Anyone else want to add to that one?
Real interesting there is, so, if you think about this as not upgrade to all the latest and greatest, let's just upgrade and try to do things exactly as they are now, then look around and see what makes sense to add. That's a very logical approach. One of the things that I believe bogs these projects down is the tendency to, look at all the shiny new objects and let's get all of those implemented, and those can be absolute killers on a project like this. The other thing I want to add, just as a little bit of guidance that may or may not be logical, or somebody else may not be able to implement this, but one of the things that has really saved a lot of time and effort on our part on this project, and be able to move forward quickly and adjust to new functionality requirements that pop in, is that we've got a really great relationship at the executive level between the partner and the company doing the upgrade. And so one of the things that this has really allowed us to do is it has allowed us to take new requirements, analyze them quickly and efficiently, because we have all of these tasks in Microsoft Project, and so we can quickly analyze effect on the critical path or whether we need to add additional resources. We then are able to communicate very quickly back and forth with the internal project team and external project team, and get very quick sign off on, adding additional functionality. A lot of times you will find that requires this big paper, chain of, various sign-offs that really can slow a project down. So the fact that the team has worked together so well and expedited that process, I think really has allowed us to a great extent to stay on track.
Yeah, and I would like to add something to it that earlier you talk about that are we using, what methodology or so. Although at a higher level, we are using the sure step. But if you look at the way we are managing our development scope changes, it's more of a Scrum or Agile that weekly basis, we know what we are developing, what functionality we are completing, just like in Agile projects. As well as the change in scope, basically it does not stop us that we need to go through a paper trail like Peter talked about. So those are the things are adopted from Agile instead of going through in a sure step or waterfall method.
Is there anything else you can say about sort of the executive sponsorship? What are maybe some of the qualities? So if our listeners are maybe dealing with an executive sponsors also on a project, things that your executives are maybe doing better than average or better than the average executive, you might say?
So absolutely, because they are hands-on. When I say hands-on, some of the key decisions are taken on time, and we don't have to wait for a specific day of the month or something like that. And the decision-making process is really quick. So that way we keep moving forward.
Yeah, Peter, you had mentioned that you just remarked in passing before this conversation that for example, change orders move very quickly. Are they moving at a speed that's above average? Would you say, from your experience?
Oh yeah, we have almost instantaneous agreement. Because what we do is we have daily project meetings. We only have weekly updates to the executive team. But I can pick up the phone at a moment's notice and call any of the executive sponsors and say, hey, we hit this pothole this morning, and we need to address it, X, Y, and Z. And then Arun will get on and confirm, from his side, and then we'll get a call almost immediately on which direction we can move in. Mm-hmm. I think the hardest part of talking to the executive team sometime is it says in the documentation this is standard functionality. Why isn't it easy? And there's always that you have to kind of laugh because there's that big disconnect between the marketing materials and what's called standard functionality, and then you dig into what standard functionality means on the backside, testing, tweaking, customizing, all this other stuff. So that's to me, it's more kind of, the funny side of that, because a lot of the stuff, the assumption is, hey, it's in the cloud and it says it's standard. Why isn't it easy? So, but they're very, very knowledgeable and easy to educate on, what that means in the real world, behind the scenes.
Could we get a little more of a sense of sort of the size of this project in terms of the project team? Breakdown of how big the project team is, and maybe how many, or maybe the size of the AX deployment, just to get maybe a little better sense of as we go through all these project details, sort of what kind of solution this looks like.
I believe that the initial thought process was that you had that project manager, you had that team manager for the project on the consulting side, a main developer, and then some potential backup developers. But that rapidly grew to a much bigger development team as the as the timeline got narrower and the functional requirements got wider. So it's it's a significant undertaking. From the standpoint that this is not a small project, it's not an enterprise-wide project where we're looking, an SAP Oracle type size project. But I think that from the sheer requirements it is bigger than you would think on the number of users and the size of the overall project.
And add to what Peter just said is we have about close to about 70 users and about 120 or so approvers as well. We call it approvers. So we have up to close to about 200 users at any point hitting the system. So that's across the North America. That basically includes US and Canada, and then and also we'll have Spain coming in as well.
All right. Yeah, and I'm a true believer in the idea that you really can't judge the complexity or the sophistication of the use of a system based on how many people are in it. It could certainly be using lots of advanced features and have dozens of users or hundreds of users rather than thousands. I wanted to get on to, if we could, a little bit more about tools and techniques that are being used on this project. So we mentioned lifecycle services. Peter, you mentioned Microsoft Project is is playing a role in managing this project. Can you talk about that, or are there other tools that you think are worth people knowing about that have been useful to make this project move ahead well?
I'm going to let Ibrahim talk about his use of Microsoft Project, but I want to add my 2 cents on it from the standpoint that I think Microsoft Project is one of those tools that is misused from 2 standpoints. Number one is you can overkill a project with project management and a tool like Microsoft Project, which is fairly complex, right? And so what you can do is you can bog down a project like this with too much project management and too much use of the tool set. On the other hand, you can completely be flying blind as far as what that important critical path and what that capacity is on the project without using a tool like this from an expert standpoint. What I see a lot is the misuse on both sides where you don't understand how to use it, and people are really using it like a alternative to Excel because they don't understand the intricacies of what a critical path functionality is and what the capacity requirements are, or on the other side just overkill. So to me, we've got that almost that perfect Goldilocks use of it where it's not we're not using it full time on our side, but we are looking at it on a daily basis and updating it every single day with new information. And having somebody that actually knows how to use the tool so that we can, reflect accurately at a moment's notice that new information that we're getting on a daily basis, absolutely critical because we have such a tight line and we have a very specific go live date that we're shooting to meet.
I agree with Peter, especially in this project. Project plan itself or schedule itself is not that long. We have tried to use, some of like Excel, where we don't need to capture everything. Like when you set up the environment, there are a lot of things our technicians do, which are like 2 hour, 4 hour. Those all are important, but you don't have to basically list everything inside your schedule. So they can manage as a checklist, and a lot of places we have done that. And overall level, like the higher level, basically we manage it in schedule. In addition to that, we have all these issues, change, risk, managing within Excel right now because of the size of the project. Otherwise, we do use like a SharePoint, and for our document sharing, we are using in like a Dropbox. To make sure that the updated documents are available, scope is changing, plans are changing. So those are available to the team immediately instead of we are emailing and people have different version of different documents. So that's another key thing we were looking at, especially when we were doing designing and changes.
Arun, from your side, what are you doing to kind of keep status and information captured so that when you can bring it back to your team, either to your team members, to your executive sponsors, to reflect sort of what what Ibrahim is pulling together on a day-to-day basis with the project plan and a SharePoint repository. Is that all being captured well from your side, or does it take extra effort and extra tools?
No, I think we just go with Ibrahim's status pretty much because he does a fantastic job of capturing the information, and me and Peter, we usually, before we go to the executive meeting, we go over it, ensure that all the information on that is right, and and convey it in a way which is understandable for the C-level execs. So
Yeah, we don't run parallel. We're not running parallel tool sets. We're really relying on the information we're getting from Ibrahim, and that's why the interesting thing is we have daily project calls every single day where we're feeding new information into his tool, and it's not, like I said, it's not an all day thing, but it's a daily task. And I think that without that daily, task and expert management of it, I think we would be in a completely different situation on the project.
Well, you've got a couple. It sounds like you've got 2 to 3 months left, or aiming for a very specific date. I understand. How's everyone holding up on the project? I know it's not a really long project, but is it staying positive? Is the group still pretty energized, would you say?
So there's a couple of things that you said that amaze me, right? We're upgrading a piece of software. Why is 6-7 months not a really, really long time to do that? That kind of blows my mind when you think about it, right? But we're used to thinking in terms of that. But I still think of that as, gee, that's a really long time to upgrade the software. You know what I'm saying? And which is again one of the reasons why I'm looking at this process, and we're having these podcasts to kind of inform people of everything that's involved. We are about the halfway point of this with a very specific deadline. Fantastic, fantastic job by both project teams, because one of the things that that you typically see in a project like this is inevitably what you do is you get stress on the project because of things that you can't control that happen on every single project. And inevitably what happens is that leads to that friction between the teams and the finger pointing and all those other good things. Our teams have been so integrated and worked so well together. There haven't been any, there have not been any cracks, on the project teams, working well together. There's obviously, differences all the time, as there inevitably have been, but we've worked those out very smoothly and have a great team, and one of the better projects I've ever worked on.
Anyone agree with Peter or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with Peter. So, of course, we have our differences and we have our issues. But, at the end of the day, we think what is better, which is the better way to go, and, what's better for the company. And that's how we keep moving forward.
Ibrahim, what are your thoughts on this project, on going through we call it an upgrade. I think we could have a whole nother episode. Is upgrade really the right term for this? Because it's not exactly a traditional upgrade when you're moving completely to another replatforming and upgrading at the same time. It's really different.
I think it is a right term,
yeah.
And people don't realize one major issue with the general upgrade. And also here, the infrastructure side, the environment we have completely differently. So it's a new implementation over there and upgrade from the application side. And within application side, we need to realize that every time when you have a customization, it's not a simple upgrade like, moving from Windows 8 to Windows 7 to Windows 10 that you throw in disk and basically it will be upgraded, and maybe, few upgrades in next 2 weeks. It will be, downloaded. So it has to go through all the functionalities. You need to basically match old functionality, existing functionality with the new functionality available. And I think Arun already talked about the deprecated objects, that those functionalities are not available in new version. So how we are going to basically implement it? So of course we need to do new customization because now there is a gap. So this is pretty standard procedure in any application upgrade, unless you are running in any lab environment, then it's a different thing. But in reality, when you have different integration with different other applications also, which in this case it does, then how those applications are capable to basically work with the newer version like D365 compared to AX 2012, or if they are not ready, when they will be ready, and if they are not ready, how basically our client will be able to do their daily job, what they are doing today after upgrade. So those are other issues basically go along with all the application upgrade projects which we need to face.
Jason, Ibrahim just said something that almost slid by unnoticed, but in retrospect and thinking about having these calls every morning, what he does is he moves the pace along, and the meetings are focused on project updates, and they never devolve into solutioning sessions, and they never devolve into complaint sessions. And just now that he starts talking about it, I just realized that that's how these have run every morning, because he's very on point and pushes it through. And that's one of the things that to an extent makes it possible to have these calls on a daily basis with everybody showing up and giving their input, because they don't stretch out past the hopefully 15-20 minutes we allocate to them, and they don't become complaint sessions, and you don't have 10 people on the call with 2 people coming up with a solution to something. Those things are scheduled afterwards. And it really hadn't occurred to me till he just mentioned that just now, that how effective that is, and how much I believe, thinking about that right now, how much that keeps that meeting on point and keeps the keeps the project moving forward. Really good job on that, Ibrahim. It just occurred to me.
Thank you.
Well, I wish you guys the best of luck on the final stretch that you have here to get to go live with finance and operations. This has been really interesting to hear about, and it's great to hear about a really positive project like this. So, Peter, thanks for suggesting that. Anything else you want to add, Arun, that we haven't covered that you think other AX customers could learn from you?
One thing I would definitely say is have a good resource who would understand Azure, because this entire thing is going in on Azure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Peter knows about this as well. Like we kind of we struggled. So to get that going. So Azure is the word now. So you need to know anything and everything about Azure. I would say Azure, and also even though the consultants they come in and they help us with this implementation, this is a brand new software and brand new things, and they're not going to know that everything as well. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Yeah, we are paying them and everything, but then they're not going to know stuff, and they need to learn it as well. So unfortunately, it is one of those situations. So I think the customers need to keep that in mind as well.
Okay. Well, I think we are going to end it there. Arun, Ibrahim, Peter, it's been great talking with you all. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Peter Jekyll for joining me, as well as Arun and Ibrahim for being on this episode. If you have any feedback, please do reach out, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. If you have any ideas for other topics to cover in our AX to Finance and Operations series, please do suggest those as well. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.